Hi, if you're just joining us, this is Nature Day at the Water Pavilion. Welcome. And I have the great pleasure to introduce the second session today, which is Hope Comes Out of the Blue, Inspiring Climate Action from Source to Sea. And I will welcome Ruth Matthews, Senior Manager of the Action Platform from Source to Sea, who will be moderating, from SeaWe, who will be moderating this session. Ruth, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and it's really wonderful to be at the beginning of this incredible Nature Day that we have lined up coming through the whole day, and I hope you'll stay for all of it. So we are going to do a little modification. Adaptation is a big part of responding to climate change. Our opening speaker is not yet here in the pavilion. So what we would like to do is start with a video that we've put together with voices from around the world that really help us to begin to see what we mean by this hope comes out of the blue. We really want this session to be an aspiring, hopeful session. There's so much that we can look at in terms of the climate change, the terrible loss of biodiversity that we're facing, the way that we're feeling water stress, floods, droughts, et cetera, and the impacts that we experience those on a daily basis. So we really do need to come out of that, lift up from that, and find the hope and the inspiration that we can get from working with nature. So please, video, please.
There's no greater gift to life on Earth than the natural movement of water from source to sea. Yet we've altered those flows in ways that greatly increase the threat and risks of climate change. Many rivers, for example, no longer reach the sea, which means they no longer deliver critical nutrients, sediment, and fresh water to coastal environments.
We have lost 87% of the world's wetlands, from inland waters upstream to marine and coastal ecosystems downstream, with 35% lost since 1970 alone. With the loss of these ecosystems, we are losing our most effective natural carbon store, as well as an effective defense against extreme climate events. Wetlands are also being affected by rising global temperatures, with impacts on water availability and on the rich biodiversity they harbor. Loss of wetlands means loss of effective nature-based solutions for climate change, water, livelihoods, and biodiversity on which we all depend.
People have been altering natural ecosystems for millennia, but the pace of change has accelerated to the point that we are facing rapidly increasing climate change, alarming levels of biodiversity loss, and increasing impacts from floods, droughts, and polluted water. We are seeing sinking deltas due to upstream dams starving rivers of sediment, dead zones in the ocean due to too many nutrients being washed into coastal areas from agriculture and untreated wastewater, and the loss of both inland and coastal fisheries as a result of habitat loss and altered river flows.
Healthy coasts and oceans play a critical role in regulating our climate as well as greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We hear a lot about ocean temperature, but also oceans provide more than half of the oxygen we breathe and serve as critical carbon sinks. If we are polluting the ocean with wastewater and other types of pollution, we shift the balance and we likely find ourselves with an ocean that cannot provide the oxygen we need to survive or the ability to absorb carbon and regulate temperature and climate.
These changes are felt most strongly by the poor, by women, and by indigenous peoples, but increasingly they are felt even in the richest countries.
We do not have time to solve our water, climate, and biodiversity crises in a piecemeal fashion. We need holistic solutions that address them simultaneously. That means bringing all stakeholders together to devise collaborative solutions and implementing policies that incentivize those solutions.
The complexity of climate change forces us to embrace the whole system. The source to sea, catchment to coast, or ridge to reef approach emphasizes the connectivity of ecosystems and our dependence upon them.
The source-to-sea approach is a holistic system approach to manage important resources. For instance, increasing impact of changes in the water flow can accelerate water-related disaster when floods or drought happens. Such impact can actually accelerate as water flows downstream and into the ocean. Thus, important to take source-to-sea approach in addressing these climate change impacts.
Source-to-sea management recognises the linkages from land to freshwater, the coasts and the ocean, that create a continuum from the source to the sea. This source-to-sea continuum is linked by water, biota, sediment, pollutants, the built environment and ecosystem services.
The source-to-sea approach requires integrated water diplomacy to benefit all stakeholders.
The changes we see in source-to-sea systems have been driven in large part by our siloed approach to development. Decisions are made only considering their impact to a specific geography or individual sectors. This can lead to insufficient consideration of the linkages between land, freshwater, coastal and marine ecosystems, resulting in benefits in one place causing social, environmental or economic harm in another location.
Mother Nature is the best engineer in the world. She integrates across all sectors. We must urgently strive to understand how nature functions and processes work. We must coordinate investments to pilot innovations for rapid upscaling. The most profound impacts from climate change are related to water. Nature gives us the answers to climate change adaptation from source to sea. We must look for these answers, find them, and then replicate them for a sustainable world ahead.
Wetlands or water-related ecosystems cover freshwater as well as marine and coastal ecosystems, connecting from source to sea. Wetlands play a huge role in mitigating and adapting to the effects of climate change across sectors and economies. These inland ecosystems provide vital services such as filtering water, retaining sediment, and preventing erosion, which protects coastal blue carbon ecosystems such as seagrass beds, which are among the most effective and efficient carbon sinks in the world, storing carbon up to 55 times faster than tropical rainforests.
Flood control offers a great example of multiple co-benefits. As floods intensify, instead of raising the height of levees, we can strategically reconnect rivers to their natural floodplains. This will not only reduce flood damages, it will sequester carbon in soils, recharge groundwater, store and purify water before it flows downstream, and rebuild habitat for birds and wildlife.
We will not succeed if we don't recognize that land and sea are one. We cannot treat them differently or manage them separately. We must address them together as a whole system. The challenges ahead of us are complex and require working together across many disciplines and industries. Humans don't naturally do this. We love to work in silos. We need to put an end to this and break down those silos because together we have the answers. In order to do this, organizations need to be incentivized to work together. We need structure that includes mandates and funding requirements that demand cross-sector collaboration.
I would like to call on countries and leaders to commit to source-to-sea management, including source-to-sea perspectives in climate mitigation and adaptation planning in their countries. I would also like them to increase coordination between sectors along the source-to-sea continuum to build system-wide resilience. Lastly, it would be great if they could take action to address source-to-sea's challenges that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions.
We cannot continue to manage interconnected systems with a fragmented approach that motivate isolated responses that have unintended negative consequences. The climate crisis is here and we need to act now. We must do it wisely to invest our resources and efforts in the best way possible. And here I think the source-to-sea approach is one of the fundamental parts of such an approach.
from a source-to-sea perspective. This is the only way we can solve our water, climate, and biodiversity crises simultaneously and cost-effectively.
To meet the ambition needed to deliver the Paris Agreement, we must urgently scale wetlands' massive carbon storage and adaptation capacities as a central aspect of all countries' NDCs and broader climate, DRR, and development policies. Parties to the Convention on Wetlands are committed to protecting and restoring wetlands as a critical solution to climate change. We know what we have to do, and we have the instruments and tools to do it.
So thank you for that. And as you can see, we were talking a lot about this kind of source-to-sea continuum. And the reason we're doing that is because we really do see that this is a missing piece of the puzzle when we look at how we're addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, water conflict, et cetera. So to introduce a little bit more for this session, we now do have our opening remarks speaker. I would like to invite Peter Thompson, the Honorable Ambassador Peter Thompson, the UN's Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Oceans. And I think he has a great way of inspiring climate action from source to sea.
I'll just show my brand first. SDG 14, to conserve and sustainably use the ocean's resources. I'm sure you've all got it. Closely linked, of course, with SDG 6. Look, folks, I was walking down the Clyde this morning. Beautiful day. I don't know, if you're not walking here, please at least once have a walk along the bonny banks of Clyde while the weather's good. It's absolutely fabulous out there this morning. Gulls catching the sunlight, the blue sky mirrored in the rippling water, and made me think again about the fact that 30 miles from here, you're into some of the planet's most beautiful nature. So please, before you leave Glasgow, get up into the highlands or out into the islands and you'll see what I mean. So source to sea, yes. The action platform, I've been working with them for years, and it's an essential part of the jigsaw of the thousands of solutions which we are now putting in place to get us away from the precipice that we've been approaching for too long. I often use my hometown as an indication of why this source to sea ethos is so central to what we do. My hometown's Suva, another beautiful place on the planet. Peninsula sticking out into the southern Pacific, and in the morning down on the seawall you can see, as the sun comes up, you can see the clouds start to form in the sky, the little puffy cumuluses, and they build up, and by the time you're having a school lunch, we'd see them moving like battleships across the harbor, these great white battleships of water up there in the sky, and they'd hit the mountains at the head of the harbor, and bam, you just knew every afternoon about 3 o'clock there was going to be this precipitation such as you don't see much in your countries, I don't think. I mean, tropical rain is a wonderful thing to see. But bam, it would come down, fill up the streams, down into the harbor, and that's the hydrological cycle in action every day. On an island like that, you can see it happening, but of course it's happening on continents and everywhere. The hydrological cycle, which is, of course, what source to sea is addressing, because as the water, even in a place like Suva, as the water precipitates, gets down into the streams and into the groundwater, it's picking up all of our detritus along the way. And by detritus, I include agricultural excess fertilizers, wrong kinds of fertilizers, heavy metals from industry, sewage, heavy metals from sewage, our plastic plague pollution, which is all around the world, getting into those that hydrological cycle by way of, big pieces of plastic and the microplastics that we've all come to learn about in recent years. I now live in London, and it just breaks my heart every time I walk past one of those famous pubs, because everybody's standing outside, smoking their cigarettes, and straight down into the gutter. And none of them thinks about the fact that that's breaking down the microplastics, flowing into the Thames, going out and being eaten by the nature, by the animals that are out there in the North Sea, the cod and the haddock, which is coming back to them in their fish and chips inside the pub. So, the source to sea ethos is just such an essential part of the jigsaw to get out of all this. Look, I don't want to drop names, but I was having dinner the other night, and John Kerry and Al Gore were our two speakers. And I think Al Gore's been to every COP since they began. And he and John Kerry both agreed, this COP is different. The game is over of trying to convince people that we've got a problem. That's past. This is the COP where everybody's got it. Even the huge polluters and the purveyors of fossil fuel, they've all announced their targets now. Okay, it may not be enough, but they've announced their targets. Previously, they were deniers. So now we've got to obviously improve on those targets. But I think what they were referring to most, and it's something that I'm seeing in all the things that I'm going to, is that the solutions needle is really starting to move now. I've been involved for a long time in getting shipping to zero, decarbonization of the global shipping fleet. The last 5 years, you're sort of aware that the technology is there, we have to do it, but it's still talk. The first event I went to this week was across the river here. All the ship owners, there was biggest ferry owner in Norway, for example, said all of their tenders now for their new vessels are for hydrogen power. Fossil fuel is just, on its way out. Diesel and bunker fuel is on its way out. The shipping industry is finally getting its act together, and the various big shipping companies stood up and said, we've now got 5 vessels, big vessels, which will be hydrogen powered, out there, being built now. So that shift is underway. My big thing in coming up here, obviously, was to join the fight to get the GHG emissions down. But the other thing for me is to move the climate finance needle in the direction of the sustainable blue economy. Why? Because the sustainable blue economy is our future as a species. If we don't get it right with the ocean, we're on our way out. But the ocean, if we treat it right, is going to give us our food, our energy, our medicine, and I've been in this game long enough to know that that's not just talk. It's all there for us. New forms of nutrition, endless amounts of renewable energy. It's all out there. The sustainable blue economy is what we've got to be working towards. But as we work towards it, we have to be sure that it's governed by principles of sustainability, and it has to be governed by source to sea ethos as well. And so this is why I say it's an essential part of the jigsaw. Look, you've got people much wiser than me to talk to you in this event, but you're probably looking up there and thinking, what's that thing dangling around his neck? We had a family confab before I came up, and I was told that the main thing I had to do was defend children's rights. And I thought about it a bit, and I thought, well, that's exactly right. Lowering GHG emissions, why? Because we care about our children and grandchildren. We don't want them to live in a 3 degrees world, which is what our WMO says we're currently heading towards. That's a world on fire. So my thing dangling around here, the family put together, grandfather of Grace, Mirabelle, Poppy, and Rosie. And Rosie will be 80 at the end of the century. And the thought of her having to spend her time putting out fires for the last 30 years of her life is unacceptable. But I do have this feeling of hope and optimism, as I said, at this COP. I think we've finally got it. We're finally putting the solutions in place. Make sure that source to sea is part of the solution, and we'll be on the right track. So somebody said to me, where do you get your sense of optimism and hope from, apart from what I've just described? And my answer is always, have some grandchildren, and you'll see you can never give up. Thank you.
Great to get that context of why we care, why we're here, and that ideally what we're really trying to do in this COP is move from talk into action and to raise the solutions that are really going to make a difference. So to dig into that more, holding this context of that we need holistic system-wide approaches, we want to go more specifically into how nature is an ally for us. So I'd like to invite the panelists up, and we have one on screen and the other two in person, so really hybrid here. So the first panelist is Rachel Dunk, and she's from Manchester Metropolitan University, and definitely has a strong science voice to bring to this puzzle that we're putting together. Then Ralph Chami, who is Assistant Director at IMF, and has done some very interesting work that I think will bring us to that hope and inspiration that I have as the aim for this event. And then on screen we have Henk Ovink, who is the Special Envoy for International Waters for the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So welcome, Henk. Glad to have you here. All right, so let's start in with these questions to hear from the experts a bit more about what is this special solution that we want to bring forward today. So Rachel, we heard in the video and also from Peter that healthy ecosystems are a really critical ally for us, that they bring something into the discussion around how do we solve this crisis that we're in, how do we keep away from that 3-degree future, keep it to a 1.5-degree future. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what does that mean in terms of is there a role for nature in carbon mitigation, adaptation? What's the scale of that role? How important is it for us?
Thank you very much, Ruth. So I don't think we're going to be able to solve the challenge that we're facing without relying on and supporting and bolstering the role of nature. We're facing not only the climate crisis, but a biodiversity crisis, the issues that we've been talking about with freshwater supply. And nature is our ally in addressing all of these issues. So specifically in terms of climate change mitigation, if we look at the open ocean, the oceans have been buffering everything that we've been doing wrong for so many years, both in terms of the temperature, with the amount of heat energy that is taken up by the oceans. If all of that had gone into the atmosphere, we'd already have been burnt out, never mind on fire. But also in terms of the carbon dioxide, that we're putting it into the atmosphere and it's being pumped into the oceans. The issue that we're facing is we're reaching the limits on the buffering ability of the oceans. And if we're nearing that precipice, that if we push it too far, then recovering from that's going to be dangerous. But we're not out of time, or possibly impossible. We're not out of time yet. And that's why this hard and fast action right now is so vital. If we sort of come further towards land in from the open ocean into the coastal zone, you've got this relatively sort of thin strip of absolutely amazing ecosystems in terms of their carbon storage and the biodiversity that they support. I mean, if you're looking at things like your fringing coral reefs and your mangrove forests and your seagrass beds and your kelp forests and your deep water corals, they're all absolutely critical for supporting the base of the entire ocean ecosystem, and also for the livelihoods of millions of people who live in the coastal zone. And that's before we even start talking about the amount of carbon that's stored in these environments. So it's not been as visible to us. Oceanography is still a very young science comparatively, and we're talking about this thin margin. But we heard on the video the rate at which carbon is stored in these coastal blue carbon ecosystems is much higher than the rate at which it's stored in our terrestrial forests. So overall, they're roughly equally important for the amount of carbon that they're taking out of the atmosphere, and critically important to keep what is in these environments locked up, rather than degrading them further and that being released to the atmosphere. I'm conscious I've spoken for a while, Ruth, so I'll hand over back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And this is one of the things that I really love about working in a collaborative atmosphere is we haven't known each other in the past, and yet I'm learning so much by bringing together the water community and the ocean community and really having where the fresh and salt water meet. And so this is what this event is about. And so to take it a little bit more concretely, Ralph has been doing some really interesting work looking at how different species like great whales and forest elephants, how they actually sequester carbon themselves, but also how they interact with their habitat has a lot to do with how much carbon gets stored in the habitats. So Ralph, could you tell us a little bit about your work? I know you could go on for a long time, but give us a highlight so that we all can get inspired by the work that you've done.
Sure. Thank you, Ruth. Basically, it's the scientists who've done all this work. My job, I'm a financial economist, I'm not a scientist. And I happened upon this work during a visit to the Sea of Cortez, where we were studying the blue whale, and the scientists were having a conversation about the incredible amount of carbon that is found in the body of the whales, and through the virtuous cycle of how the whales fertilize the phytoplankton. Now, I work at the IMF. I've been at the IMF for 23 years. I've been with policymakers. And I come from the markets. So I was thinking, well, this is a language of science. How can I best translate that language of science into the language that we would understand, which is the language of cost and benefit? You see, because when you talk about conservation, the first thing comes to people's mind is, how much is this going to cost me? What was missing from the equation is, what's the benefit? And the benefit resided in the realm of science. So I figured, well, can I do a best translation of the science into a language of dollars and cents so that the policymakers can then make an informed decision? It costs me this much to conserve, but I get this much more. So let me give you a quick answer. So the first one we tackled was the great whales. And what we were looking at, we looked at the services that great whales provide to the society, for which markets exist and prices exist. So I didn't capture all of the services that these phenomenal creatures perform, only those for where markets exist, and I want to stress that. And what we came up with is that one great whale, on average, the value of its carbon services, impact on fish stocks, and on whale tourism is a minimum of $2 million per whale. We did the same for the elephants, if you like, and but that was just carbon sequestration. Was about $1.75 million, but it goes on and on. We're doing stuff on seagrass, salt marshes, and other. And what's fascinating is how once you see it in dollars and cents, then it comes alive for people like me from the markets, because I'm like, okay, so now when you go to the policymaker and you say, we need to conserve salt marshes, we need to protect the whales. Well, how much is this going to cost me? Well, X dollars. What do I get in return? You get Y dollars, and Y is greater than X. Then you can make that decision. You see, you can bring inside the tent, as Peter was saying, we need everyone to fix this problem. We can't leave anybody outside the tent. And who's been left outside of the tent? People like me, the financial economists. We've been demonized as the guys who are only interested, what's in it for me crowd. Well, the what's in it for me crowd also can be motivated once they understand that they have something to gain and something to lose from this. So this conversation of converting it to dollars and cents, not to take away anything from the intrinsic beauty of life, but it's just basically, it's another language that brings in a segment of the society that is incredibly powerful. These are policymakers or people with the resources that can really change the game. And that's what we did. I'll stop here.
That's excellent. I really like that combination of bringing everybody into the tent, and also helping us actually see what tends to be invisible. What nature provides for us is happening all the time, day and night, no matter what we're doing. It's there, and we just have taken it for granted. And I think what is coming forward now is we can no longer take it for granted in the way that we treat it. We really need to treat it in a way that values it, and this is one of the languages that brings that value. And so I really appreciate that that you're fluent in that language. I am not. And so now I'd like to turn to Henk. So Henk, we have this discussion going on about how to bring blue carbon out into the open, and to have it have a value in the discussion around climate change, biodiversity loss, water stress, etc. And what I'd really like to turn to you to find out is, from your view, how do we bring this tent together? How do we have more of a holistic, system-wide approach to how we live in nature and in our daily lives?
Thanks very much, Ruth, and thanks all for hosting. I'm almost in the train on my way to Glasgow, so we'll be joining you late tonight, tomorrow morning. I think, and it's been also echoed by the other speakers, starting with Peter in the beginning in his inspirational address, that we have to shy away immediately from siloed approaches. Single-focused approaches only will increase the complexity and the challenges we face. And I think the IPCC Climate Change and Land report from 2019, a little bit forgotten because it was in between the 1.5 and the cryosphere report, but that says that everything we put out in our economies, in our investments in infrastructure is increasing climate change, and almost all the time we're doing it, we're actually increasing our vulnerability. So business as usual is not enough. We have to get to a systems approach. We have to look at the challenges comprehensively. Why? Because they're all interrelated. And understanding that complexity is of critical importance first, between social, economic, cultural, environmental challenges, understanding the interdependencies across all sustainable development goals is of critical importance. And what you find with that understanding in this water is this blue thread in the development agenda and for climate action. Now, in that, the system-wide approach of source to sea is so important because it really goes literally from the source to the sea, matching and mixing all our interests, all stakeholders, institutional, individual, and informal, all their needs, ideas, but also all the opportunities. Only then, by understanding that and then start to value these critical needs and the aspects of water for life, for our economy, our environment, our society, our cultures, our politics, then only can we start to organize ourselves around it. And this is where we get to why the ocean is so important. It's too often out of sight and out of mind, but it is an ally in climate action. Not being treated as much, it's not invulnerable. Marine ecosystems are massively suffering from pressures originated on land. So the solution lies at the source, but the approach can only be systemic from source to sea. So the benefits of taking a source-to-sea approach in tackling climate change is that we cannot afford not doing so. The climate crisis is too complex to be, approached siloed. in our isolated responses. So we mainstreaming source to sea thinking and doing in how we grow our food, manage our water, design our cities, our economies, our industries and landscapes is crucial, critical, I would say, to realize nature's gift on land and in the ocean, capturing carbon, adapt to climate and mitigate the change. And without such a holistic, comprehensive approach, and without leaving no one behind there, going alone, forget it. This is about with everybody and everything at all times.
Thank you so much, Hank. I really agree with you and appreciate how clearly you can bring together that we can't do this in a siloed way. We really need to come together in that tent that Peter talked about. But we see that we have a what, we have the blue carbon, and we have a how. Which is we need to have this holistic source to sea approach, ethos in the discussion. But I'd like to go a little bit more into the details. So should we focus our efforts around this carbon issue, blue carbon issue on, protecting and storing places that have the most potential? Or do we need a more kind of diverse, spread out approach? How would we prioritize our investments?
I would echo something that we heard earlier from Peter, that we need a jigsaw of 1,000 solutions. We're not in an either or, we're not in project A or project B, we're not in blue carbon or forests, we're not in salt marshes or mangroves. We need to be doing everything as hard as we can and as fast as we can, as long as we're confident that we're making a change in the right direction. So for me, if an environment is storing a little bit of carbon or an enormous amount of carbon, it's still going to be storing carbon. Now, if we had no restrictions and everyone was happy to do everything and the only thing constraining us is the number of hours in the day, then clearly it would make most sense to restore or preserve the environment with the highest carbon storage potential if that was the only thing we were valuing. There's also the biodiversity and the supporting of livelihoods and the fresh water and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I would say it is everything, not a single silver bullet. Thank you, Ruth.
Excellent. I love those all of the above responses. We have to do all of the above. So,
Ruth, can I come in?
Of course, Hank.
Because it's a discussion, it's hybrid, but I couldn't agree more. And we come from a time where we really thought or even believed or wish we could believe that a problem was simple and we could deliver a solution and get it done. But that was never the case. And now in the current times of increased climate change, population growth, economic growth, and so forth, it is only less possible. The problems are complex, wicked, so the solutions should be as comprehensive and inclusive too. There are no silver bullets. There is no pill you can swallow against climate change or decrease in biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So I couldn't agree more. Thanks for making that point.
Excellent, and thank you for jumping in. I really appreciate that you felt like you could do that even from this screen that we're looking at. And I think to follow on with that, like one of the things that you were saying about this language of finance is that, yeah, it gives a different way of us thinking. And one of the things that I think is evident is that we're blind to a lot of what value we get from healthy ecosystems and the species that live within them. And so is there only the finance piece that can wake us up, or how do you see that we can kind of go from how we've been of nature is something that we take from, and that's how we get our benefit, to nature is something that is there and we receive benefit from, and it's not just there, but we support it in being there?
Okay, okay, let's start with what we have now. All right, what's the value of a living whale today? Let's say today a ship were to hit a whale. What's the penalty? 0. That means the price or the value that we assign to a living whale currently, right now, is 0. So the first thing that I thought we were doing is to say, if we look at the services that the whale provides to our society, aside from its own intrinsic value as a creature that has the right to live, keeping that in mind, but looking at the services to us, the value is a minimum of 2 million. So when people say, well, Ralph, you're putting a price on nature, I say, no, already the price there's for nature, 0. It's 0 for a living whale. It's a 0 for a living ocean. That's why we're all here. So what we're really saying, the scientists actually been saying it for a long time. What my job was, I'm not a scientist, is to translate that knowledge that existed in the science. I mean, the work on the whale started with Pershing 2010 paper. It's in his paper. He tells you exactly how much carbon each of the species of the great whales capture. So, first pillar of this work, if you really want to go from the talk about it to actually how do you get the markets? Because I can tell you how the markets can come in. Even if I give them a price of 2 million, a value of a whale of 2 million, of the services of a whale, is not enough. Mark's going to say you need to do a bit more than this. So let's start with this. You have 4 pillars to this work. One is you need to start with the science, because it's the science that is revealing the wonders of nature that we didn't know about. The paper on the elephants sequestration in the forest is circa 2019. It's Fabio Berzaghi. He's actually somewhere here. I saw him. Okay, and these are the guys who basically discovered what the elephants are doing in the forests of Africa as they are dying in front of our eyes. So you got to start with the science. So let's take a country. Let's pick Fiji. Fiji, all right? Just to make it concrete in your head. If Fiji wants to take its nature to the markets, in what sense? So what does the scientists tell Fiji about what's in their nature? Do they have forests? They have mangrove, seagrass, salt marshes? You know, what do they have? Do they have elephants, whales, dolphins, what have you? Second part is the valuation of that, translating the language of the science into the language of dollars and cents, if you like. That only does what it does. It takes natural capital and converts it into a natural asset. But you got to do more for the markets to come in. This only says this is incredibly valuable in the science. It's incredibly valuable in dollars and cents. Next, the third pillar, which is incredibly important, which has been missing, is the policy action. If you care about something, don't talk about it. Do something about it. Create the legal framework that actually enshrines that asset as a national treasure of the government. So for Fiji, let's say, I know very little about Fiji. Now I'm going to reveal my ignorance. Okay, let's say they have whales, for example. Okay, all right. So let's say they have whales. And we valued the whales at 2 million in terms of their lifetime service. The next action would be for the government of Fiji to say, this whale, if it's a resident whale in my waters, it's a national treasure. And it has a value of at minimum of 2 million. Meaning what? Meaning if you were to harm it, the penalty is 2 million. Why? Because once you do that, you've gone from valuing an asset to creating some legal structure. And the definition of capital, by the way, for us practitioners, is a capital is a combination of an asset and codification in the law. Every asset that is traded in the market is 2 things. It's an asset, but it's codified in the law. Me doing valuation as telling you whale is 2 million, yeah, it's very nice, but does nothing. The markets can't act on it, meaning the market is going to ask us, is it on your balance sheet? Can you put the whale on your balance sheet? And right now you can't, because you need the state. You need the government of Fiji, for example, to say this is a national treasure. And there's a value if you were to harm it. At that point, it converts from being a natural asset or natural capital to a financial capital. Now it's on the balance sheet. Once it's on the balance sheet, then People like me look at this and say, wait a minute, this is a new class of assets. I can build a whole kind of service around it. I can give you an example if you give me 2 seconds. Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London could come around and say, wait a minute, this is an asset in the water. And you know, those ships coming in, when I insured you, I didn't realize there was an asset in the water worth $3 million. I need to bring back that contract and put an addendum that you are not insured, because I didn't know there was an asset in the water worth $3 million that you can harm, and then you would have to pay a penalty for it. You see, so you need 4 pillars: science, valuation, policy action, and then the markets say, wait a minute, this is a new asset class. What would happen? You can sell the carbon services of these assets, not the assets themselves. Because why? Because climate, Paris Accord is all about going carbon zero. Well, with what technology are you going to go carbon zero? We don't have any technology that's going to take you to carbon zero. By the way, I'm going to borrow, may I borrow one? Okay, I'm going to borrow one. Because I'm here and I hear this a lot. I want to correct a misperception perhaps. People talk about carbon reduction. I used to teach growth theory when I was a professor. I used to tell my students, graduate students, the following. The atmosphere is like a tub. The tub is full of carbon dioxide. And there's a faucet that is dripping carbon dioxide into it. Carbon reduction is about turning off the faucet. But what's in the tub is going to kill us. So you need to suck the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And who is there? Nature is there. The ocean is there. The ocean can suck the stock of carbon. The flow is carbon reduction. But the stock, what's going to grab that stock? What's going to reduce? It's nature-based solutions. Mangrove, seagrass, salt marsh, whales, elephants. The carbon sink itself, I mean, the open ocean itself, according to IPCC 2019, if anyone bothered to read what the scientists have told us, between 1830 and today, the open sea, which is a gift to all of humanity, as you were saying, has captured 440 gigatons of carbon. 440 gigatons. Now, I'm a financial economist. Multiply this by $50. That's over $2 trillion. That's the gift of the open ocean to all of humanity. And it does that on a daily basis, as you were mentioning. There's a flow. And by the way, the equation for the flow is in the IPCC report. So you can go figure out how much is the ocean on the open ocean, which belongs to everybody, is grabbing on a daily basis. I'll stop here.
That's excellent. And I think that's one of the things that I had as an aha when I started working on bringing this session together, is that nature actually takes the carbon that we're spewing out and puts it into a form that isn't harming us anymore. And I think that's an amazing protective force that we need to be more engaged with in recognizing, in valuing, and I want to turn to Hank now in making those mechanisms that bring that value, not just at a market level, but also in a cultural, social, cultural, political level. So Hank, I know you've worked a lot with the value of water, but maybe you can expand beyond the value of water to the value of nature, to the value of these services that we get. And how can we institutionalize, have governance mechanisms, have ways of organizing ourselves so that value is explicit in our decision making?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth, and thanks also for everything you bring to this conversation. I think I'm very sorry. I don't have the answer. I wish I had, because that would really make life for all of us on this planet better and more easier. I think I can only continue to more or less repeat, but also showcase that if the challenges are this complex, if these relationships are so pressing, if past practices, single focus practices, only make us more vulnerable and increase climate change. And we know that by a comprehensive, across SDG approach, long-term, therefore sustainable and inclusive, with everybody, institutional, informal, individual approach, is the way forward. Then we have to break our silos. Then we have to find opportunities to really come together. And I think water, in my role as a special envoy, I always find that water is a make or break. All these disasters we see around the world that have a relationship to water, there's also the positive flip side. If you organize yourself systemically around water, there is the capacity to bring all these actors, partners together. So water unites, brings us together. But for that, you have to organize that. And in our siloed, fragmented society, institutionally society, that is not happening. And nature doesn't care, climate doesn't care, the ocean doesn't care, rivers don't care about the borders we made as humans. But those borders actually prevent us to come up with the approaches, solutions that really have an impact, matter, and help us change course. So overcoming those borders and boundaries, a source to sea approach with that, because it's so systemic, helps. We did a research that was released this spring about how, for instance, in Europe, every country has a different coastal resiliency strategy. And that means that every country takes a different IPCC in Europe, in the European context, in European Union, different IPCC scenario, a different time horizon, a different approach in governance, in policy and regulations, and in finance. That fragmentation, only on this continent, if you look at the rest of the world, it is fragmented at all. Flip side, the positive, if we are able, and this is what Source to Sea shows, if we're able systemically to bring these partners together and organize ourselves around us, this is where solutions start to evolve that really make a difference. And for that, in the current situation also of distrust towards private institutions, gaps that increase in society, it is about creating, as we call it from literature and practice, safe and soft spaces, places and processes where we can bring people together to build trust, focus on this enabling environment by focusing on the understanding, the research, capacitating people and their institution, and provoke solutions that are innovative, that have the capacity to be able to be scaled up and replicated across these systems. And this demands that, our focus should be, when you think about values, of course, at the end, about the investments for the projects that really make a difference, the pipelines and pathways forward, but as much on the millions we have to spend in the people and their institutions and the capacities for an enabling environment across these systems that really can help us lift change course. So a plea for investing in these value-based approaches is of critical importance, and Source to Sea as the inspiration and the pathway, you could say, and the backbone of such an approach is of not only critical importance, but also inspirational, as that inspirational capacity.
Thank you so much for that, Henk. And I would like to mention at the beginning, I was introduced, I'm a senior manager at the Stockholm International Water Institute, which hosts the Secretariat for the Action Platform for Source to Sea Management. And this is why I'm here hosting a session on Source to Sea. What I want to indicate is that it is a multi-stakeholder platform that is open to any organization that has a commitment to addressing these development challenges that we're talking about in a holistic way, in a system-wide way. We do a lot of peer-to-peer learning. We also develop knowledge products, have events like this to raise awareness, and really work together. And it is an open tent to have this discussion around how do we make this paradigm shift to valuing nature for its intrinsic contributions to us, and do that in a way, as Hank has said, that breaks down those silos and brings us together across these different sectors, across the different geographic segments, where we are terribly suffering from fragmented governance, fragmented finance, fragmented planning. So just to let you know that this is available to you, and you're welcome to ask questions, contact us, and join the dialogue with us. So we are quickly running out of time, although I would love to keep this conversation going. Grandfather Peter, do you want to say just a few words of what came from this session that you can go home and tell your grandchildren about, the good things that the adults are actually planning on doing?
Thanks so much, Ruth. Time is short. So first of all, thanks to the panel. Thanks to you, Ruth. As Hank and Ruth know, SDG 6 and SDG 14, we work very closely together. I mean, the hydrological cycle, that's just logical, right? But the UN Ocean Conference being held 27th June to the 1st of July in Lisbon is also when the high-level, what's the name of the organization for freshwater? The intergovernmental one. Anyway, they're having their meeting in Lisbon at the same time. That's to coordinate the freshwater and saltwater community. That's happening at the same time in Lisbon. So as far as I'm concerned, there are no silos between freshwater and saltwater work that we're doing. So I'd like to end on, because I was fascinated by Ralph's cost and benefit analysis of whales, because it's so contrary to the way I was brought up in Fiji and the way I think about nature. But I'm really glad you're doing it, and I'm fascinated by it. I'll put a challenge to you. I don't know if it's a request or a challenge. Could you do a cost-benefit analysis, please, for a creature called Prochlorococcus? I'll write it down for you. Prochlorococcus. Okay, because we're Homo sapiens, we're big species of life, We tend to think about whales and elephants and things. But Prochlorococcus is the smallest photosynthetic organism on the planet. Okay? And it lives in the ocean, of course. Why is it important to us? That little creature produces 20% of the oxygen in the biosphere. We're dead without it. Okay? And what are we doing? And this is where Source to Sea comes in. We're trying our best to kill off the creatures of the ocean with our pollution, with all the poisons that we're pouring into it, with the heating of the atmosphere. We're trying to do our best. There are tipping points for creatures like Prochlorococcus. So that's my challenge to you. Can you do a cost-benefit, please, for Prochlorococcus? But as I said before, there are no silos between fresh and salt water, and we've all got to work together as a community, and I hope I'll see many of you in Lisbon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate you all being here, and wish you the best in the rest of your COP, and hope that we continue this conversation going forward. Thank you.